South of Adelaide.
I wanted to get your thoughts on China firstly and allowing an investigation. I know you've said before that, of course, they should allow an independent investigation of this COVID-19 pandemic. But there is a bit of international pressure now, and Australia's joining that. Will it make any difference? Will they be able to ignore this international pressure?
Well, they'll try to in the short term. You'd expect that because they run the narrative about this being an internal matter, and we will run the narrative that it's very obviously not an internal matter and it has had huge consequences for the global economy. China, like a lot of countries, has signed up to a range of different international agreements and conventions on dealing with health issues, and they're a member of the WHO. So I think it's very important in terms of China's reputation and standing in the world that they allow there to be an international investigation, not just a Chinese investigation, into the origins of this crisis. After all, it's costing the world what will literally be trillions of dollars. It's cost a lot of people their lives, more importantly than the money, and it's costing a large number of people their jobs. So I think the Chinese government, the Communist Party there, owes it to the international community to allow this independent investigation. It can be led by the WHO, but it needs to be a genuinely independent investigation. As Scott Morrison, I think it is, has said, with all the powers of a weapons inspector, they should be able to go in there and look at anything they want and interview anybody they want.
But is the World Health Organization the best body to conduct such an investigation at the moment? Because it's failed on this pandemic. I've just demonstrated at the top of the program how into February you had the World Health Organization Director General criticising countries for banning travel from China.
Yes, I mean, he just took his talking points from Beijing, of course, because you might recall that Australia introduced a ban on visitors from China at the end of January, and the Chinese government, to use a phrase, went feral about it, saying that this was disgraceful and unnecessary. And the WHO was using the same sort of talk, not about Australia, but the same sort of talking points about bans on international travel. No, the WHO would have to the investigation would have to be under the auspices, I think, of the WHO, but there should be a genuine international investigation, not just an investigation by the WHO, but by officials, scientists, epidemiologists from a range of different countries, including some Western countries. It's got to be a full and genuine investigation, not that we want to humiliate the Chinese government, but what we want to do is find out how it happened so it can never happen again. If it came from a lab, as some people claim, well, fair enough. They didn't deliberately do it. It was a lack of health protocols and safety protocols at the lab that led this to happen, and shouldn't ever happen again. Yeah, we can't undo the past, but we can find out what happened in the past so we don't repeat it.
Now, given how poorly the WHO has performed, do you agree with Peter Dutton that the current Director General, Dr. Ghebreyesus from Ethiopia, should lose the job, that it needs a new leader?
Well, I think in time it'll have to have new leadership and be somewhat restructured. And I think that's a point Australia should be making, not so much about the personalities. I'd keep more out of the personalities. And I would say that we will continue to fund the WHO, but the countries that fund it want reform, want it to be a much more independent, much more forensic and much more focused organisation. You know, we don't want it getting into sort of woke agendas and so on that might be more attuned to the arguments of the Democratic Party in the United States, which it has been doing a bit over the last few years. We want it to get into the hard issues of international health, pandemics, epidemics and so on. And we want it to be entirely independent. We don't want it to, be pandering, as it apparently did do on this occasion, to the communist government in Beijing. So we want reform of the WHO. I think that's what we should demand.
Well, as he's wont to do, Donald Trump has tackled this head-on by saying that there's a freeze on funding until they reform. A lot of other countries will talk about reform. he's hit them where it hurts. Is that going to make a difference? Will that ensure that there is reform?
It will make a difference in time, because Donald Trump does something, then people say, well, and particularly in the media, they hate Donald Trump, so they then oppose whatever he says. But, of course, he's on to something very important here. The WHO has proved that it does need substantial reform. And Donald Trump should be working with the Scott Morrisons and the Boris Johnsons and Emmanuel Macrons and so on, the Western leaders, if you could call them that, Shinzo Abe, all of these people. He should be working with them to draw up a specific agenda, a list of demands that we have for the WHO to be reformed. So not just cut funding, but demand reforms and explain what reforms we want. We should be specific about that, and we should work with other countries to do it, not just the United States or Australia doing it alone.
Now, I've got to ask you, Alexander Downer, about Malcolm Turnbull's memoir, which, of course, has been dominating a lot of domestic political debate in the last week or so. Now, one line from Malcolm Turnbull, of course, I used to work for him. I used to work for you as well, so let's close that circle. But he makes the point, I think, in some of the publicity around the book, that he says Julie Bishop was Australia's best foreign minister. What do you think of that assessment?
Well, leaders say that about their foreign ministers. That's one of the reasons I love John Howard so much. He used to say he thought I was the best foreign minister. And no doubt Robert Menzies said Richard Casey was the best foreign minister, and Bob Hawke thought that Gareth Evans was.
And, and Kevin Rudd says that Kevin Rudd was the best foreign minister.
Yes, that'd be right. That'd be right. I think these are impossible judgments to make, because you can't compare foreign ministers because they operate in different times in history and they have different roles. Think about what their achievements are, and make judgments on the basis of that, I think, is the thing to do.
She was a good foreign minister, though, wasn't she, Julie Bishop?
She was very high profile, very articulate, and always very well briefed. And not to say this critically, because you can't accuse me of this, but she always looked very smart, and I think that went down well. No, I think she did a very good job as the foreign minister, and I had a lot to do with her in that capacity because I was the High Commissioner in London.
Indeed. Thanks so much for joining us, Alexander. We'll talk again soon.